Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lindsay, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a true crime case, a solved true crime case that happened back in 1992, so 30 years ago. Today I'm going to be talking about the murder of Kathy Woodhouse. It's a case that happened back in 1992. It has been on my list for a while now, and it's also one of those cases that got solved because of a forensic breakthrough. Which back in 1992 obviously was considered very innovative. Oh wow, I need to look that up. Innovative. But the forensics led to solving the crime, and those are my favorite, so if you would like to hear more about this, please stay tuned. Just before I get started, I would like to warn you that this video will be mentioning sexual assault as well as abuse. So just to give you a heads up, in case you would like to find another video, I have other videos on my channel, including hamster content, arts and crafts. If those are more suited for you, then please feel free to click out. And before I get started as well, please remember to like and subscribe if you would like to see more of these types of videos. And please feel free to suggest any topics, cases, videos you would like to see from me in the comments down below. On January 18th, 1992, 911 dispatchers received a call from a man reporting a rape and murder that happened at a dry cleaner store in Herrin, Illinois. And this town was very, very unfamiliar with any amount of crime, to the point where 911 dispatchers actually believed this was a really bad prank call. The call came from a payphone, and the man refused to give his name. He only informed police about the rape and murder before hanging up, and due to the nature of the call, police decided to check it out on the off chance that this wasn't just a really, really bad joke. Police located the payphone from which the call had been made, and just up that road noticed the dry cleaner store that was mentioned in that phone call. And when they made their way to the dry cleaners, they noticed the front door was wide open, but it seemed completely empty. There wasn't anyone inside. So they make their way through the store, and as they get past the counter, they notice a purse with its contents scattered everywhere on the floor. With no sign of anyone around, they make their way to the back of the store, where behind a water heater they found the body of Kathy Woodhouse. Kathy was a 40-year-old store employee and a mother of three. She had been married to her husband Joe for 18 years, and she had 3 kids ranging between the ages of 13 and 22. She was actually meant to be transferred to a different store just a couple of days later, but unfortunately she crossed paths with a murderer before that could happen. She was found almost completely naked. She was only wearing a bra, and police quickly determined that she had been sexually assaulted as well as brutally beaten before being killed. Police had absolutely no idea what could have led to this crime scene. Herrin, Illinois never saw any crimes of this nature, so they weren't sure where to even begin, but they decided to start with the phone call that was placed. They strongly believed that the man who had placed the 911 call was involved, potentially as a witness, but most likely as the killer. Of course, the first thing they did was to collect fingerprints from the payphone. Unfortunately, none of them came back as a match. And they decided to focus on more physical evidence around the crime scene, and they noticed a plastic garbage bag laying next to Kathy. And outside of the store, they also noticed the leg of a pair of tights or pantyhose. So just the leg, not the whole pair. Just like someone had cut off one length, one side of the tights. I don't know why I'm struggling to explain. This is very obvious, but only one leg of a pair of pantyhose. And it is such an odd thing to do because it's not like you can actually put it on your leg and it would stay. So police actually believe that this could have been a disguise used by the killer. So they put that aside for now and went back into the store to look for more evidence. Inside the store, they found a check for $14 addressed to the store, and it was signed by a customer. And they managed to track down the customer and contact her to ask her if she had been in that morning. The lady who had written the check told police that when she came in that morning to pick up her laundry, she couldn't find any store employee. She looked around for a little bit and decided to just grab her clothes, write a check for the amount that she owed, addressed it to the store, and on her way out, a man came out of the back room to ask her if she needed any help, and she assumed he was an employee. She said, "No, I got my clothes, the money's on the counter, thank you," and she made her way out. And police knew for a fact that this had to be the killer, since there were no other employees working that day, especially not a man working there. And the times would have coincided with Kathy's murder. The customer described the man as a 30 to 35-year-old tall white man who weighed over 200 pounds and who was wearing a hat. On top of her own description of the man, police managed to get in touch with a witness who had seen this man place a call at the payphone, and he only described the man as a 6-foot-tall white guy, but didn't get a good look at him, so that's as much description as he could provide. And with those two witness statements, police got a police sketch done, and they were convinced that leads would come pouring in. Again, this is a very small town, and these types of crimes never happened. The autopsy revealed that Kathy Woodhouse had died from blunt force trauma to the head, and the marks seemed to have come from a metal mop ringer that was in the store. And I did have to Google it. The mop ringer is exactly what I thought it was, but it's basically that bit where you can just squeeze out the water from the mop, but you can get a metal version. I've only ever seen the plastic ones that you buy from a store. But obviously, this being a dry cleaners, they had the metal version of it, and it looked like the killer had used that as an assault weapon. Kathy had also been sexually assaulted, so police examined the rape test kit. However, it belonged to a non-secretor. So basically, it's someone whose fluids don't indicate which blood type they are. And this was 1992. They couldn't just get a DNA profile. This didn't really exist back then. So police were basically hoping to figure out what blood type the attacker could have been, just to maybe narrow it down or get some sort of physical evidence to link it to someone else. Unfortunately, this person's body meant that those, like, if you get a saliva sample or any other samples, you wouldn't be able to tell the blood type from just analyzing those body fluids. This gave police very few leads. Aside from the police sketch, they really weren't sure where to go with this or what the next step should be. But they did catch a break when one of Kathy's friends contacted police to let them know about a strange phone call she had received the day before her murder. A man had phoned up at the dry cleaner store and asked Kathy what colored toenail polish she was wearing. And it was so strange that she actually did mention it to her friend and told her family about it as well. I would too. If I'm at work and someone's calling me to ask me the color of my toenail polish, I'm telling everyone I know, and I'm looking into this because that is just strange as hell. And it turns out the call came from a 25-year-old man who was very quick to deny the phone call, but police looked into the phone records and confronted him with the evidence, and he finally admitted to having placed the call, but reassured them that it was just a prank call he liked to do every once in a while. He actually knew Kathy from the dry cleaners. He used to go there as a customer, and every once in a while he would get bored, make a prank call. I don't know if he's just saying that to save face. I don't know what he meant by, maybe he is interested in the toenail polish color. For me, a prank call is like pretending you're calling the pizza place and ordering a pizza when it's actually a dry cleaners. I'm not like calling someone to ask for the toenail polish color. But either way, he was adamant that this was just a prank call, and he actually had an alibi for the morning of the murder. He was teaching at a local community college, and I hope his students never found out about this call because that would just be so embarrassing. Unfortunately, that meant that he was ruled out as a suspect, and police were back to square one. They have no fingerprints that can match anyone they know. They have no idea of the blood type. They have very little physical evidence, aside from a plastic garbage bag and the leg of a pantyhose they're not even sure has anything to do with Kathy Woodhouse's murder. Police catch a second break when someone finally calls anonymously to ask them to check out a Paul Taylor who could be involved in Kathy's rape and murder. And again, it's quite frustrating that the call was anonymous. This time police had high hopes and decided to look into Paul Taylor, of course. A little background on Paul Taylor. He had a bit of a rocky childhood. When he was 2 years old, his parents got divorced. His mother was said to have a drinking problem. She would drink quite a lot, and she ended up remarrying a guy who would be verbally and physically abusive to not only his mother, but also Paul. Because he grew up quite poor, he would often get bullied in school because of it, and he ended up running away at some point and lived in a foster home for a while. He started getting in trouble with authorities when he was 14. And when I say trouble, this is not the usual stuff a 14-year-old would do. He made his way into the women's bathroom at a Baton Rouge hotel and threatened Sandra Lott, who was, at the time, just drying her hands. He managed to get her into a stall and threatened her with a butcher's knife. He made her undress herself and attempted to sexually assault her. However, he couldn't perform. And when someone else walked into the bathroom, he threatened her again with the knife to make sure she wouldn't make any noise. And once the person left, he made her dress herself up again and managed to get her into a nearby field. This is a 14-year-old we're talking about, and I have no idea how he managed to, first of all, get into the women's bathroom just like that, and then threaten her with a knife and make her leave the hotel. Not willingly, but, I'm not sure how far the field was, but either way, he got her into a nearby field and made her undress herself again. And this is when Sandra realized that now that they're in a field, he was asking her to remove her clothes again. He was going to sexually assault her and most likely kill her. She knew that if she didn't run now, she probably wouldn't survive. So she made the very bold decision to run for it, and she did. And luckily, she bumped into a man who helped her out and called police right away. Police didn't manage to intercept Paul Taylor at the time. However, 2 weeks later, he struck again and tried to grab a woman in the same hotel bathroom, and this time police managed to intercept him. Because he was only 14, the judge ordered Paul to spend the rest of his juvenile life, the rest of his teenage years, at the Louisiana Training Institute. And he actually got let out a little bit early. He was meant to leave at 21, but got let out at 20 because psychologists declare that he had made maximum progress. And he had a job lined up, and he was released under the condition that parole officers would be keeping an eye on him. And he did okay in the beginning. He did have a job lined up. He moved back in with his mom and started working at Hardee's, which is like the Carl's Jr. of the East. I believe they are the same fast food joint, very similar, if not the same. And he was just there flipping burgers, working while living at his mom's. Looking into his background, police thought, right, this might be the right guy after all. But what's so interesting is that Paul's mom's house was only 2 blocks away from the dry cleaner store. And the Hardee's he worked at actually used that dry cleaners to launder their uniforms. Police decided to speak to the fast food joint manager. And essentially, they wanted to know if Paul was in charge of bringing the uniforms to that dry cleaners, which would explain how he would have been there in the first place. I mean, I don't know many 21-year-old men who would go to the dry cleaners for fun. So police were hoping that maybe the manager let Paul in charge of dropping off the uniforms, and that's where he would have seen Kathy. However, the manager said that Paul wasn't in charge of dropping off the laundry. However, it's quite interesting that police contacted him when they did, because Paul had actually quit 15 minutes ago and was planning on leaving the state of Louisiana. Police get to Paul's house, or his mom's house, before he leaves. They intercept him just before he leaves the state, and they confronted him about quitting and questioned him about the murder of Kathy Woodhouse. Of course, he denied any involvement, and his grandma actually gave him an alibi, so she said that he had been with her the whole morning. The bummer was he looked absolutely nothing like the witness description. This was absolutely not a 30 to 35-year-old man. He was quite skinny. The only thing they had right was the height. He was quite a tall guy. But this is a 21-year-old, and the witnesses, kind of said that he was much older. However, if you do look at a picture of him at 21, tell me how old you think he is. If you saw him down the street, if you saw him walking down the street, you would also assume that he looks much older than he is. They asked him if they could search the house he was in at the time, and I'm assuming he agreed, because they ended up lifting his mattress, and under that mattress they found 2 adult, X-rated magazines, as well as a pair of pantyhose with 1 leg missing. what are the odds? They sent the pantyhose, or what's left of them, to forensics, and they tried to match the edges like you've probably seen in some other true crime cases where they match like the duct tape edges or any other fabric together to see if it would line up. But because it's tights, if you've ever even heard of tights, you would know that it's absolutely impossible to match edges. They were too frayed and they just roll up together, so it was absolutely impossible to try and match the leg of the tights to the rest of the pair by just looking at the edges. The scientist actually said that he could have a look under the microscope, and the specialist found striking similarities. First of all, it was the exact same color and the exact same dye, but it was also the same patterns of knitting, and more importantly, it had really unique chemical properties. Pantyhose actually have titanium dioxide. They're basically synthetic fibers. It's what prevents the tights from being too shiny, and both samples had the exact same amount of titanium dioxide in them. He decided to also have a look under a microspectral photometry device, and it basically just analyzes the properties of the material you're looking at, and they had the exact same peaks and the exact same results, meaning that the tights found at the crime scene or just outside the dry cleaners were a very, very close match, if not identical, to the pair or whatever's left of it found under Paul's mattress. And now this type of evidence isn't damning by any means. It doesn't even mean he's involved in the murder. It just means that somehow the leg of the pair of tights that's under his bed ended up outside of the dry cleaners. And it was enough circumstantial evidence, it was enough probable cause for police to get a fingerprint from Paul Taylor. As you can imagine, his fingerprints ended up matching the ones at the payphone, which again does not prove anything. It just proves that he could have made the call. Maybe he was a witness. All it does is prove that he had used that payphone at some point recently. Luckily for police, they actually managed to find a right palm print match to the plastic garbage bag found next to Kathy in the back room, meaning that Paul had to have been in the back room with Kathy for his palm print to end there, which placed him at the scene of the crime. With all of this evidence, police finally arrest Paul as he is leaving a rock concert with some friends, and he acted like such an asshole. He was very nonchalant. He didn't seem concerned. He acted like it was just a big joke and that whatever police had on him, they would never actually get him. Police still couldn't tell if the motive was robbery or sexual assault, or if it was murder, or maybe all three of those. But Paul clearly didn't have a weapon on him at the time. It looked like he just grabbed whatever was nearby, aka the metal Mop Ringer. So it's possible that the murder was just an afterthought or a knee-jerk reaction, but there was clearly some element of planning since he had taken the time to cut a leg out of a pair of pantyhose and bring it with him, and now police believe that this was used as a disguise, and when the customer saw him leave the back room and mentioned he had a hat, it's very likely that it was just the pair of pantyhose that had been rolled up above his face. Unfortunately, police also believe that because the customer walked in and Paul came out and removed the pantyhose or the tights from his face, he realized that Kathy would now be able to identify him, and it's very likely that he decided to murder her so that he couldn't be identified. Once he was confronted with all of the evidence, Paul Taylor finally confessed. He had stolen $3 from her purse, which means that it was most likely not a robbery, or that wasn't the initial goal. I don't know if he just saw $3 and decided, I'll just take this. And he initially tried to deny the sexual assault, but finally realized that there was too much evidence against him, so he finally confessed to everything. He did speak to the media, and he has absolutely no remorse about murdering Kathy Woodhouse, but he says he feels bad for her children. He said that at the time when he was murdering her or beating her, he wasn't thinking about the fact that she might have a family and kids. Not that it's more tragic, if you have a family than if you're single, but clearly, he wasn't thinking about that. I don't even know if he had initially planned to murder her, but the only regret he seems to have, or the only emotions he seems to have, is he feels bad for the family that's about it. He absolutely does not feel bad for the murder. He said it himself. He does not care. What's interesting is during the trial, his cousin Linda Schott took the stand, and she told the court that he had propositioned her for sex, and of course she declined. And when she did, he sent threatening letters to her, threatening to kill her and her entire family, which I assume would also be his family, which is just bonkers. And it wasn't like an anonymous letter threatening her. She knew exactly it was him because he signed it like with his name. He signed Paul Taylor and then left his mom's home address on the back of the letter, like the return address. He'd like, I don't even write return address when I send letters, and he just left all the evidence. So he wasn't even trying to cover that up. He straight up threatened her because his cousin wouldn't have sex with him. On an even more concerning note, he had also told her that he idolized Charles Manson and that he also wanted to gather a following. He wanted a band of followers, basically. So it looked like whatever crimes he had initiated when he was 14, he fully intended to keep that going. The defense team did what they could to help Paul out. They testified that he suffered from depression, antisocial personality disorder, as well as alcohol abuse. However, it's clear that he knew right from wrong and that he had somewhat planned this attack, even if the murder might not have been premeditated. Sexual assault definitely had been, and at the end of the day, he still murdered a mother of 3. He was 21 when he received the death sentence by lethal injection. However, in 2003, the governor of Illinois commuted all ongoing 167 death sentences due to inequities in the legal system. So he was no longer on death row, and he basically got a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It's quite amazing that in 1992, forensics managed to get such a solid match on that pair of tights, on the pair of pantyhose. And that's what led to getting fingerprints from Paul Taylor. So like the tights didn't solve the case, but they led to the case being solved, if that makes sense. Which I think is just so cool that they managed to use this. I don't know if the technology itself was new, but they managed to use this technology in a case to get more evidence, essentially, and to solve this case. But as amazing as the forensics are, I think it's important to realize that in this situation, if Paul Taylor hadn't placed the phone call to 911, it's possible that police would have taken a lot longer to solve this case, especially without the fingerprints on the payphone and without the anonymous caller phoning police, telling them to look into Paul Taylor. It's very likely that he never would have been caught, or that he could have attacked someone else or murdered someone else before finally getting caught. It looked like he had absolutely zero intention of stopping this criminal behavior, especially if he idolized Charles Manson and wanted a following. So I would love to know who had placed the call. I'm wondering if it's not the cousin. Clearly, maybe she already knew that he was a bit insane, because he first of all asked to have sex with her, which is the first massive red flag, and then when she declined, he threatened to murder his family or her family. It's the same, really. I wonder if it was her. We'll never know. But at the end of the day, I am just relieved to know that he is in jail for the rest of his life. Also, I do find it interesting that the witness statement did not help whatsoever. If anything, it looked nothing. Well, some people think that the police sketch does look like him. I somewhat agree. And I can't blame the customer for saying that he looked 30 to 35, because at 21 years old, he actually did look that old. It just happened that he wasn't. So it was a bit misleading, but at the end of the day, they managed to find him, and I guess you can only be grateful for that. But I do feel absolutely awful for Kathy's family. She absolutely didn't deserve that, and she was just a week away from being transferred to a different store, though that could have meant that someone else would have been the victim. It's hard to tell. But that's it for today's video, guys. Please let me know what you thought of this case. It's a bit of a shorter video for a change. I'm still not sure what next week will bring in terms of cases, but if you have any suggestions, please comment down below. If you like these types of videos, please remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.